Welcome to the Dreams of Consciousness podcast. If you'd be so kind, would you mind introducing yourself?
Yes, I'm Greg Wilkinson with Shrink Wrap Killers, among other things.
And of the other things that you do, I should say that listeners of this podcast should be familiar with you by now because your work as an engineer comes up quite regularly. In fact, almost every week. A lot of uh, the bands that I speak to have worked with you in some capacity, either recording or mixing or mastering. Um, we're we're mostly going to focus on shrink wrap killers today, but how do you describe your studio work? Do you call yourself a producer? Do you refer to yourself as an engineer?
I feel like it depends on which hat I'm wearing, right? Every band's kind of looking for something different, but usually I take a production role, of some kind of a producer. But I honestly started out more as an engineer and kind of refuted the producer role. But I started realizing that bands actually kind of wanted a producer to help out sometimes. So certain bands I'm the producer for, and some of them I'm more of just an engineer translating their desires, if that makes sense.
Sure. Uh, in your role as a producer, um, how involved are you in the finished product? Are you do you look to shape a band's sound? Do you look to just capture how they sound live? Um, what would you say your role is in getting what the band does to what someone like myself as a listener experiences?
I feel like a lot of it, there is a lot of, I do have a specific sound. I think every engineer kind of does, you know? And so I feel like I'm trying to capture a band and then it kind of does go through my sounds filter. And so in that sense, I feel like most times bands are coming to me because they know my work and know what kind of work I do rather than just needing to find some guy on the street to record their stuff. So I do feel like I do have a certain aesthetic or thing that I'm going to go for when I capture the band. I won't really know until I hear the band. And sometimes my job is to try to find, the strong points in a band's sound. So, uh, if, for example, the vocalist is phenomenal, and maybe their drummer is just there to hold it down, or something like that, the band's desires might be, hey, like let's feature the vocalist, and that kind of stuff, and I will extract the strongest parts out of the drumming stuff and showcase the vocals more, and focus the work there, and so I think that's every producer's role to do, kind of you're trying to shine the brightest light that on a band possible while you're capturing their craft. So yeah, I guess I do I do kind of bend a little bit, with the sound of the band to my will a little bit, so to speak.
I've spoken to a few bands who've worked with engineers and look for engineers or producers who take on something of like a coaching role in terms of the um, the performance aspect to get the best out of the performances. Is that something that you do as well?
Absolutely. Absolutely. We will sometimes, to the chagrin of somebody, will do punch ins and take redo until we get what we want, because I do believe, crap in, crap out. So
Right.
I think performance is king. And, you know, similar with my production work is, before throwing a mic up to anything, I want to make sure something sounds good, right? So the drums need to be tuned, the cymbals need to not be cracked, the guitars need to be intonated. I want new strings and new heads and all that stuff within reason on all these instruments before I even throw a mic up to something. Um, this way, we're focusing most of our time on the performance and not, walking back and forth, moving mics, changing mics to only find out that the strings are a year old on a guitar, or, the drum heads are soup bowls. So,
Right, right.
so, I find that probably the most, laborious part in a recording session for some people is the fact that, there is a lot of cleaning up. The reason why I like to do that is because I think that there's a soul in these songs that people are recording. And if I were to just edit, which I could just edit everything, every single bar to just be fantastic and, quantized and perfect. But I don't think that's what the bands want that come to me, and I definitely don't want to do that. I feel like I can hear that when I listen to music when things are too clean. So therefore, I would rather somebody play to the best of their ability and have a few mistakes on the recording than them, just play kind of okay and then I just clean it up digitally
Right.
and stuff. So that I do write people on performances, absolutely, as well as I will suggest if the band is open to suggestions, I will suggest, secondary, auxiliary guitar ideas or changing bass parts or drum parts to fit the part better and these kind of things, which this is where I do wear my producer hats when I work with bands that are open to suggestions or maybe newer and seeking some guidance and stuff, and that way you're getting the best performance that way.
Yeah. It's interesting. I spoke to Scott Burns a few years ago, and he said something very similar to you, which is, make sure that the strings are new, make sure that, the kit is top notch and you're using a new kit. You're not using, an old beaten up kit. And it was kind of a surprise to me because I was expecting a lot of like very esoteric studio talk about like compression and stuff like that as far as, what went into making those records. And it sounds like it really just comes down to make sure that the performances are as high as they can be, make sure the band is as well rehearsed as they can be, and make sure that the instruments are, as new or at least um as fresh as they can be.
Yes, yeah. And also make sure there's soul in the music, and so that does sometimes entail, you know, actually playing the parts, correctly. So, or changing your part to fit better. Because sometimes somebody will find them be guilty. I've been guilty of writing something that's just a little beyond my wheelhouse and, not be able to get a clean take of it. And sometimes it's just better to just scale it back a notch and just get something that can be played instead of edited, and that
Right.
kind of stuff. So those are, yeah. I mean, I think that people kind of get into this whole thing with gear where they feel like preamps and, you know, microphones and compressors and all these toys and stuff. They are tools, but they are not necessary tools. In this day and age, you have those kind of tools in computers now. It's more about capturing the actual music because there's been plenty of platinum records and stuff that have been made. I mean, there's been stuff people have made on like, laptops and no hardware whatsoever, an SM57 and stuff. There's been records out there that have done that kind of stuff. So, I mean, I think there one time like the Gorillaz made an album on an iPad exclusively
Yeah.
and stuff, so you can get away with doing major label stuff without all those toys and stuff. And so it does sometimes I do I don't necessarily roll my eyes, but sometimes I kind of get a little upset when engineers start rattling off about how important the gear is, uh and how you cannot make a real record without nice gear, because I think that's sort of an elitist thing that bands are kind of get thrown at them to sort of separate and hold bands down from making records, because they're like, oh, I've got to raise, $15,000 to go record this record right,
Yeah.
and stuff. And so, anyways, I could go on about that forever, but that's not what that's not what we're here for.
Well, I do want to ask you just a few more questions about your work as an engineer. I won't take too
Sure.
much more of your time about this, but um, I'm somebody who grew up on this stuff in the 90s when you kind of had to guess what the band was playing. You know what I mean? Like there was a lot of
Yes.
like uh, murky recordings, and you know, starting in the early 2000s, you started hearing a lot of a lot more clarity, a lot more definition. You know, suddenly you could hear like every tom roll, every cymbal fill. Um, and you know the records have only been getting uh, well, better in that sense. I mean, people will have and will argue with me about whether or not that type of recording is better than the stuff that I grew up, 30 years ago. Um,
Yes.
but in terms of the level of clarity and definition that you're hearing from modern recordings, is that just because of modern studio techniques? Is it just because everything is being done digitally? Is it triggers? What's what's been the big difference?
I think it's actually there's this like synergistic effect that is happening. The gear has been getting better and clearer as part of it. Uh, People now, I mean, I'm recording, 20-year-old people, drummers and stuff now that are doing stuff that people weren't even capable of doing cleanly in the 90s, because they grew up hearing, like, as you said, in the 2000s, recording started getting clearer and more defined, more processed. There's definitely like, in the 2000s, something I really didn't care for much was a lot of the quantizing and sample replacements of drum kits and stuff to where they're making these drummers sound inhuman. And now there's actually people that have grown up listening to that, thinking that that is what drummers do, and they can actually just physically do it now,
Right.
And so I think that that's part of it is that I'm not saying that people are just becoming better musicians, but I feel like the bar for metal now, rather than having maybe 100 bands where you're like, wow, these guys are doing fantastic stuff in the early 90s. Now you've got, thousands, thousands and thousands of people doing unreal stuff on, the drums and guitars and stuff because as the production's been getting clearer, you have bands like Meshuggah and stuff showing, death metal people that you can do that too, and Cannibal Corpse and stuff where you're like, okay, you can actually make this stuff clear and crazy,
Yeah.
and stuff. And so I think it's kind of this thing that the technology's gotten better, the expectations gotten higher for clarity, and then the actual musicianship has improved at a younger age for people. Now you have kids being able to play
Yeah.
Cannibal Corpse and stuff at 16, in their garage or whatever. So I think that there's a little bit of all that going on. And so it's the recordings that I like now is where people take a more old school approach where they still perform everything and they don't quantize, but you have that modern clarity. Like that seems to be the happy medium that I really enjoy out of listening to a lot of this modern stuff.
Right. To touch on something that you said in terms of drum replacement, you yourself don't have a problem with using a drum machine, right?
No. Oh
Yeah.
no. Shrink Wrap Killers only uses a drum machine, so
Yeah. And I think
yeah.
Brain Oil was also a drum machine band, right? Was it
Well,
Program
so
Guns?
yes. So when I started Brain Oil as it was a one piece. So clearly, I did actually play drums on recording some comp tracks
Okay.
before I had any bandmates, and then but then I played some live shows as a one piece, and that was with the drum machine because I couldn't do all of it
Right,
and
right.
stuff.
Okay.
And I don't have any problems with drum machines. I'm also a big fan of old stuff like Big Black and things like that, where drum machines and Godflesh stuff, where drum machines were kind of a feature almost.
Yeah. Yeah. As far as Shrink Crab Killers goes, I mean it's a departure from, for someone like me who doesn't know you personally and only knows you through the albums that you produce and some of the bands you've been in. It does seem like a departure from what I would expect from you. What was the genesis of Shrink Wrap Killers, and how long have you always been a fan of new wave and post punk and that style of music?
Absolutely. Yeah, I grew up loving, Devo, Wall of Voodoo, all that kind of stuff. Gary Newman, Two Way Army. Um, so Kraftwerk, and this project. I feel like I've always wanted to kind of do something where it's a little more new wave with the garage rock kind of feel. I had actually ironically made an attempt to make a band like this in 2001, and we actually called it Shrink Wrap Killers because I really wanted to do a new wave band called Shrink Wrap Killers. And we played like one show and then it just sort of fell apart. But you know, realizing a bunch of people playing heavy music trying to do new wave at the time was didn't it didn't work out. But we it was worth a shot, and I did it. I really wanted to do it again and revisit it. And so I always kind of, even in the 90s, I would record stuff on my cassette 8 track or whatever I had at the time. In the early 2000s, I would record these kind of quirky new wave songs, but I never did vocals. And um, so when I tried to do the new wave thing in the early 2000s, we had a vocalist and it was super fun, but it just wasn't, it wound up becoming more of a death rock band, which was not the vision. And so we just sort of disbanded it right away. It was like, this isn't what we're trying to do. And so, yeah, I've always wanted to do it. And so around 2017 or 18, I can't remember which year it was, but I was all, I'm gonna blow off some steam. I'm gonna make some new wave songs and see what happens. I'm gonna force myself to sing on it. And I actually I kind of got this revelation. I can just do this. This is fine because I mean I don't need a perfect voice for this kind of stuff. It's pretty trashy and lo-fi. And it just the songs just started pouring out of me after I realized I could just pull it off. I did 2 songs. I was like, you know what? I enjoy it. I'm just gonna keep doing it. And it did. I wound up with, a 10 song, what wound up becoming a 10 song LP, in 2019. So it was, well worth the experiment, I guess.
I mean, in terms of wanting to do a project like this, was was a lot of it just you being a fan of the movie Bad Boy Booby?
So that's where Shrink Wrap Killers, the idea, the concept of wearing shrink wrap on my head came from, was because there was a scene where Bad Boy Bubby wound up in a band, and they played this really kind of goofy new wave music, and they all had saran wrap all over them. I was also a big fan years ago of the first what's his name? Um, oh my God, I can't remember, but he had Gary Wilson, and he had in his record he had a bunch of saran wrap on him, and I thought that was super funny too. And so yeah, I was just kind of thinking, it's a ridiculous costume, and
Yeah.
so I don't know. I kind of was thinking new wave music with that would be really fun. But the Bad Boy Bubby thing didn't really inspire me to play new wave. I already wanted to do that. I made all these feeble attempts in the 90s to do like a garagey new wave thing. Just more, I just like lo-fi music, and so trying, but my goal, and I feel like I've been doing it, and this new album that's coming out, I'm pretty happy with because I'm getting closer and closer to cross-pollinating the different factions of new wave and post-punk and like, early electronic music, because those are all things that I feel like are appropriate for this project. So, I was always trying to figure out how can I marry Kraftwerk with Wall of Voodoo, maybe throw some extra like Ennio Morricone in there, but then also have Devo and that kind of stuff, and like even like Ramones and more currently Spitz and stuff like that, and just kind of just take all of it and just smash it together into this kind of bizarre feeling.
Yeah. The- some of your solos are uh really have this like Greg Ginn kind of feel to them. That kind of like his I don't even know how to describe his style. It's like it's
I'll
not a
take
scale
that
that
as a
any
compliment.
but you know what I mean, right? Like there's this very specific style of solo that he used to play. Was that
Yeah.
intentional?
Um, I wouldn't say it's intentional, but it definitely, I definitely have early inspirations in guitar. When it comes to guitar leads and stuff, I really appreciate old guitarists like, Greg Ginn and Paul Leary and Tom Flynn, like the guitar players where they have all this kind of wacky vibrato and tritones and all these things where it just sort of is off kilter and you're kind of and I kind of feel like I'm not at their playing capability even now. So I enjoy the fact that I feel like a lot of these solos, you kind of feel like, is he going to make it to the end or is he going to completely crash? And and so a lot of my solos are kind of a one take, and I'm all, as long as nothing is just egregious, I keep it, because I really like that feeling of chaos.
We spoke a lot about your work as an engineer. In terms of capturing the sound of shrink wrap killers, were you looking for a more retro sound? Was there any specific
Oh
era
yeah.
or any specific recording style that you were trying to emulate?
Nothing super premeditated, but I definitely, growing up, as much as appreciated metal and punk and all these different genres, the thing that's cool about all those, and then as well as new wave and stuff, is a lot in the genesis of those genres, everything was kind of lo-fi and very heartfelt and made real quick. And so I kind of had this thing with shrink wrap killers. I don't want to spend all this time setting up guitar amps, getting tones and all that stuff. So my concept is to try to make a song in a couple hours and just let it flow out. And so you can only imagine how many half songs are sitting in the garbage can now, in doing that. But surprisingly, a lot of them actually get to see the end of, get to like actually be decorated with vocals and get released. And so, um, I think that's about as retro as far as mentality is that I wanted to just kind of capture the moment and not spend too much time on the sound, the quality of it. Otherwise, it'll probably just feel like it turns into a pop band,
Right.
you know? And so, um,
I mean,
but I
that's the interesting
appreciated that,
thing.
like, like oh, go ahead.
No, sorry, I'm sorry to interrupt you, but
Oh,
that's the
I was gonna
interesting thing
say,
about a lot of those bands is, we kind of think of them as being these very raw, very, in your face kind of bands, but we didn't really know, in the late 70s, early 80s, what they wanted to sound like. Like if you gave some of those
yes,
bands a larger budget, maybe they all would have ended up sounding like, the Scorpions or AC/DC. You know what I
right.
mean? They might have wanted like a big arena rock kind of sound. I don't know.
What I was actually gonna reference. One thing I really appreciated is that Devo reissuing all those demos they did of things that wound up becoming re-recorded on, like starting with Are We Not Men and all the way through Duty Now, Duty Through the Future. I think even Freedom of Choice might have had some songs that showed up they did a Superior Viaduct did a reissue of LPs and it's like two LPs long, just full of demo tracks. And I really appreciated that they released those because hearing those songs in that light, some of those songs are are kind of sound better and the primitive really because it sounded like they just recorded it on like a reel to reel, quarter-inch 4 track or something, and they ping pong tracks, meaning they would take like 3 tracks and dump them onto one and then just layer on it. And so things are like really kind of lo-fi feeling. And I really appreciated that because I felt like those demos kind of captured Devo's ideas for songs. And I do think kind of subconsciously with Shrink Wrap Killers, that would be a point of inspiration for shooting out for a lo-fi kind of sound.
So, uh, I believe that we are almost out of time because you have another meeting
Okay. Oh
coming up.
yes.
So, hopefully we can sit down sometime when you have more free time and speak more about your work as an engineer. But I will tell
Yeah.
everyone that the new Shrink Wrap Killers album is called Feed the Clones, and by the time people hear this
Part
episode,
two.
part two. Um,
Part two.
Feed the Clones Part 2. And by the time
Yes.
people hear this episode, it'll be out through Carbonized Records. Greg, please tell everyone how they can order the album. What's the best way to get it?
Yeah, there's two ways I would point you. You could either go straight to Shrink Wrap Killer's Bandcamp page. Just type it's all one word, Shrink Wrap Killers. And the Bandcamp page, I have it in the merch area, or you can just click on the album. As well as you can go to carbonizedrecords.com and they have links with, so, he also does international and everything. So, whatever country you're in, you can get a copy. And yeah, that's about it.
And does all the merch go through the Bandcamp page?
For carbonized or
For
for
Shrink Wrap
me,
Killers, yeah.
yeah. For me, it's all through my Bandcamp.
Okay.
So yeah, no other websites or anything necessary.
And if people want to follow you personally or Shrink Wrap Killers as a band, what's the best way to do that?
I would say Instagram. I've got Shrink Wrap Killers as my account handle. And I also have a YouTube account, which is also ironically Shrink Wrap Killers is my page. That's where I post. I do enjoy making music videos, so I've got a plethora of different music videos there you can check out and stuff, both on YouTube and Instagram. Sometimes hates my music videos, so not all of them make it on. They get pulled down. I don't know why. So, so yeah, if you want to see some music videos, I would go to my YouTube. If you want to just see some amazing pictures of me holding instruments and records and stuff, you can go to my Instagram account and I'll keep you updated on whatever's happening.
Very cool. Thank you so much, Greg.
All right, thank you.